Welcome to the latest episode of the Apartment Rebels podcast. So today I am really excited to have Seth Dotterer, the CEO of SiteCompli. So I met Seth a couple of weeks ago at the New York Multifamily Summit and was really excited to really hear his thoughts on PropTech, on operations within the property management industry, and really the differences that his company has made within the industry. So really excited to have him on to talk through a few different topics. One, what is SiteCompli? Two, how Seth kind of got into the industry. And then a really major one is within the apartment industry, why it's so difficult for operators to adopt technology, to adopt and embrace technology. And what are some of those challenges that companies that are trying to sell technology might face, and how that's different than how you have it for selling technology into other industries? And really, like, what are some of those key challenges when it comes to property management? So, Seth, welcome.
Thank you very much, Jude. Really enjoyed our conversation. You did a great job moderating that panel a couple of weeks ago. So thrilled to be back and continue the conversation again.
Very cool. So we'd love to kind of hear a little bit more about how you got into into the property management industry. I know you've been through a few different companies. Previously, you were doing marketing at Conductor, and then went to Inhibit as a VP, and then went to SiteCompli, where you were the VP of marketing, and then kind of work your way up to the CEO position. So congrats on really, I'll say, incredible career growth.
Thank you very much. I'll say I guess so, although things might have been simpler in previous times, for sure. It was good stuff. Yeah, I joined in 2015. I joined SiteCompli, actually, and, really saw a bunch of the opportunities to join a company that was growing and in this space, primarily here in New York City, where we are today, but also throughout the entire, prop tech space. And it's been a great ride for the last 7 years as we continue to go through that.
Nice. So what exactly is SiteCompli? I know you all do maintenance, inspections, and turns, but what is at the core of the company, and how do you help the industry?
Yeah, sure. So we started off, as I said, in New York. We really started helping property managers deal with a very complex set of compliance things they need to deal with in New York. New York is unlike any other place in the world where there's lots of rules you have to follow, and sometimes you don't even know what you need to do. So we built a platform that really helped property managers look at their entire portfolio and say, what do we need to do? And we go get data from the city itself, organize it, present it. And that led to building some operational tools. In other words, it's not enough for the company to know what you have to do in compliance. It's actually getting people in the field, the maintenance people, the supers, as we call them here in New York, or the other folks that, to be able to actually follow the processes you need to do. Oh, I need to say, is there a child in this apartment? Are they under 11? Are they under 6? If so, I need to do a lead test. All the things that are sort of super complex, and building technology that made their lives a lot easier in managing.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and so we started off there, and then a few years ago, we had some of our customers that were using it for more than just compliance things. They started using them for move-in, move-outs. They started using them for inspections, broader than we originally ever even thought about. And we realized that we had something amazing on our hands here, and that's when we started our national expansion with InCheck, which is our inspections and workflows and reporting system that we have today.
That's awesome. And it's always cool when customers kind of take your product and make it meet additional workflows or things that you just never really thought about.
Yeah, it is the most exciting and most stressful part of my job, I think, is when we get to see customers who are stretching and adding and putting new opportunities in front of us. And it happens all the time. It happens like every single day. This person has a process that they've always managed internally by hand, or there's someone in their office that just remembers to do something, and they want to put automation in place to make sure it always happens, or they want to extend that best practice to all the other properties that work on there. And there's amazing things that can happen when you listen to your customers and follow their lead.
And one of the challenges there, it's fun and exciting, but one of the challenges there is when you have to think about your original like product roadmap where you are like, hey, this is an opportunity. We have people that are actively trying to utilize a feature that's maybe not fully flushed out because it wasn't actually built for that. So you now have to make that decision like, oh, should we invest more time in building this out, or should we kind of stick with what we had on our roadmap originally?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And then there's all sorts of things when people shift, like a bunch of our customers are switching from pen and paper to a digital inspection for the very first time. And they have all sorts of preconceived notions, right? Like nobody expects a pen and paper to automatically launch and trigger something else, or they don't automatically expect it to do something. But when it's on, your phone, you're like, okay, cool. Now it can do all sorts of other things and complex things. And that process of saying, oh, that's awesome feature. It's amazing to see some companies, the change management comes from inside the companies, and some companies actually look to us to say, hey, what should we be doing here? And even that is a feature that we originally didn't have, which was a library of workflows and best practices, which is like, oh, what can you do if you're in a multifamily, residential, and you're looking for a compliance thing, or you're doing a commercial, and what's my best practice for doing, tenant interactions and those kind of things. And so we ended up building that library to be able to share some of those best practices and let the customers start to sort of consume what they wanted to one at a time, and being able to eat it that way as well.
Oh, that's so exciting. So going back to the original idea behind the company on like compliance. Yeah. So what makes compliance within the industry so complicated?
Yeah, well, I think there's several things that make compliance, complicated. One is every location is different. New York is extraordinarily complex. I mean, many of our property managers in New York have discrete people who just deal with compliance. Whereas you go outside New York and they're talking about not just compliance in, how are our people behaving, or, what are we doing to actually comply with, housing laws or anything along those lines. But hey, have we done the actual property operations, the inspections, are we actually making sure that the notices that we need are required to give our residents are going out on time and they're doing them? And then it's like, okay, well, that's a different law if it's a building under 6 stories or over 6 stories, and just the extraordinarily complexity there. And there's a lot of data. There's a lot to keep track of. We have over, almost 1 million residential properties on our platform. Wow. And it's kind of crazy. And so thinking about managing that by hand or, in a spreadsheet somewhere, it's just impossible, and much less being able to say, I need to run a report and say, what do we do? What do we not do? What's going on in these areas? And so, just the sheer, complexity has really changed over time. And then there's the knowledge, like this is areas where you have to know exactly what you're doing, or it can be significantly problematic for you, right?
I imagine a lot of fines.
Yeah.
So exactly how are you all able to get what those requirements are and get them into your platform? Are you or someone on your team? I don't think it's going to be you. Someone on your team, like a team of people, going in to review all of the different regulations, laws, or whatever within New York City or whatever areas you guys operate, and then build that into your platform? How do you actually do that? And then how do you keep on top of that if things like change?
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, we have 3 real pillars to our, company. The one is the technology, obviously, to be able to keep going through those. Second is what we call our data insights and operations team, where they are constantly going out, looking at what's going on and tracking, hey, trends in the industry. Here are things that are actually getting fined a lot, or those kinds of elements. And then our education aspect of it. We do a lot of educational materials, best practices, just even things like, hey, blog post, the city of New York has changed how they think about this, and they're now enforcing this instead, or there's been this update, or this is a best practice as you think about moving forward nationally on how you handle this particular topic and doing that education. So we really split it into 3 ways. And then when we hear from customers as well, like, hey, we need to do this, we need to track it, we need to be able to, monitor this more carefully, that feedback goes right into that same loop again. And it's a great virtuous cycle that we track.
Oh, wow. So then on the customer end, if they are utilizing your platform, like what does it look like from their end? I know you mentioned that for a maintenance supervisor, they are able to look and see exactly every item that they need to inspect and kind of see what the nuances are. Like you mentioned, if there's a child under 11, they need to do this. So what does that look like from their end?
Yeah, so the best part is with all of these procedures, that inspection, what we try and do is make it super easy to use. We say, if you can swipe through Facebook, if you can swipe through, anything online, you can swipe through our app, and that's as complex as it needs to be for the actual end user. So we just ask a question of like, during an inspection, is there a child in this unit? Yes. If so, what are the ages from there? And then automatically triggers the thing. So all I need to do, trigger a follow-up on that lead test or whatever else we might have that goes through there. And we have things triggered really 3 ways. One is I'm in the unit. I need to actually trigger an inspection and have it walk me through what I need to do. The second one is on a schedule. I need to do this every year, or I need to do this 15 days before a move out. I actually want to go run a process that's not compliance related. It's just, I actually have a series of questions I want to ask before that. And the last one is based on a data change. So, we got an alert about a violation on that unit, or 311, or whatever those might be. Or we actually got a move out, date updated in Yardi, and we need to trigger a different thing that goes through there. So we really have those 3 different areas. It can be manually, I need to know what to do right now. On a schedule, do this every year, 3 months, whatever that might be, or from a data. And that can be everything from a trigger to, hey, when this certificate of insurance expires, remind somebody that they have to do something about that and go from that.
Oh, wow. So the end users primarily like the site teams, or is there a lot for the regional or someone at the VP level?
So we actually have different roles who can be assigned different things from that for that very reason, because you may say, I want all of the, assistant property managers at all my locations, or the community managers if you have them, or whatever that might be, to do a specific task. And then after it's done, I want someone in the front office to be able to do something else, update something or ping someone else, whatever that might be. One of the most powerful things that we've seen is that interaction. What used to be I printed out your email and I stapled the work order to it and I'm handing it back to somebody in the office. Everyone's had that kind of a thing. Well, imagine instead, I have a standard workflow, and when they find something in the field, I actually found that there was a flood and there are 3 things that need to be coordinated. I need someone to rip out the carpet. We're going to do that internally on our maintenance team. I need a mold remediation person. Go schedule that outside. And I need to update and change the leasing date that you're going to actually put it back on the market. Whatever those might be, if they can be built in, instead, now you're not waiting for that piece of paper and then someone to review it and then to do all the mental gymnastics of, all right, what does this mean? What is that going to do? It can happen the second it's found in the field. It can automatically trigger all those other things. And that can be the difference between, one, getting units back on the market faster, which is a material difference. But 2, it also means that whatever the procedures that property management company wants to follow, these are our ways that we improve our NOI, is we replace the carpet after 3 years, not before, whatever that might be. This unit gets renovated on turn because it has orange cabinets or whatever, those things might be. They can be built into the operational aspects and the flow that just automatically happens. And that allows property managers to start tweaking the entire flow across groups. So this is, yes, who uses it? In an ideal world, it's being used at lots of different areas. And that's from inspections into the field to reporting on what's going on to being able to say, actually, we're going to go ahead and see what's missing and be able to change that, or say, hey, we found some stuff in this inspection that's going to delay it. What do we do in those exceptions?
So with all of that, that's a lot of changes for property managers and how like operations are basically done. Like you mentioned that for some of them, it's really going from a very paper-based process to now having something one electronic and then having those like additional benefits that go
Yep.
along, whether it's those like triggers that you couldn't do before when it was all fully paper-based.
Yeah.
So when you think about that, like what have been some of those key, I would say like the biggest benefits that clients experience when they decide to implement something like what you all have?
Yeah, I think we think about it in three different benefits. Clearly, there's the sort of asset manager view of, hey, we are going to make our properties more efficient and we're going to be able to improve NOI aspects of it. We're going to be able to get visibility on what's going on the ground without actually having to go bother a bunch of people. That's one benefit out of it. Then we have the actual property manager or the regional who is bombarded all day long by the emergencies that are going on. And this allows them to say, actually, next time this happens, I just want this to happen automatically. I don't want to have to go into firefighter mode every time that happens, because I guarantee there's enough else going on that I'll be in firefighter mode somewhere. But I want to see what's not happening, not having to coordinate what should be happening automatically. And then there's the people in the field where it's sort of like, hey, if we can make that inspection happen a little faster, make it easier to use, make it so that they take a picture and it's gone and they're done. They don't have to worry about filing a report or updating something. Their day can go faster. They can be more efficient. They can be more organized about everything as well. So those are sort of the three levels we see. And what's funny is that almost every client comes to us with a different reason. They're like, hey, we're coming in from the top down, or hey, the maintenance person is coming in saying we have a real problem that we need to fix.
Yeah.
But you see it spread into these other organizations and the benefits there, and that's really when we get the most excited, is when we can see it on all three of those levels at an organization, because then we know we're helping much more broadly than just a single point solution.
So then with over 1 million units on the platform, you guys have clearly figured out something, and also clients are finding benefits for the platform. So when you think about the reasons why there might be resistance to implementing something like you all have in place, what have some of the common things been?
Yeah. So look, I think in our industry in general, there is a understandable, pushback onto tech, because the first sets of tech were all the accounting forward side of things. In other words, because the accounting side of things were so complex and able to go, that's where the basis of all the PMSs really lived. And then everyone else had to use them. And there just isn't a desire for someone who's in the field to become a master of technology for that sake, right? And because the tech was originally built not to help them, but sort of to help with an accounting side of things, I think there was a big pushback. On top of that, in the last couple of years, there's just been such an overwhelming set of new tech that people could buy, and there are new salespeople and new people calling me and new projects to go through, that there's oh man, I don't want to bite off something again, because I don't know whether it's going to help me or whether it's just going to be a big pain in my butt to be able to get through there. So one of the things we take all our clients through is sort of a self-discovery phase, where we say, what's the thing you want to get out of our product? And we make sure we spit that back to them, and they hear it, and they have the opportunity to be like, no, that's not it. Because the person that who may have used our tech today and yesterday for one purpose, if someone else comes in and they're like, we're not so concerned about saving time on the ground, we're really concerned about improving our overall, efficiency, or making sure we're only, getting approvals for things when they're outside of the bands, whatever those might be. And so you have to spit it back and put it in there, and then feed it to them little bit by little bit. What's the thing that makes this worthwhile? And then say, okay, also, here's some other things that people are doing. What are you doing? So we have an implementation manager that just does implementations. So a new client comes on board, they get a customer success manager, and there's a support team. And obviously the person who brought them on board, they're all involved. but we also have someone who just does implementations all day long, sit next to them, because they can understand how to have those dialogues and have people who may never have done this before, who didn't go to school to, implement tech. They went, they grew up running a business, and then they want to understand, how do I make what my business goals out of here? Not, I get excited by the tech side of things. And, there's different generations. We see things on that too. You have folks who are coming on board who are sort of being like, I don't want to do paper, and I don't want to log into something. I have to do something on my phone. And those obviously help, but there's also areas where we're like, how are we going to do that organizational change and help you change what happens when yourself, you have different levels from the property manager's perspective. They have different levels of a technology engagement already inside their organization.
And I think that's a really interesting point that you mentioned about the younger generations coming in and having like different expectations for how things are going to be and how they want to do their job. So it's like, I don't want to have to do everything like paper-based. And I think that's an important point when it comes to technology in the property management industry, is that it does impact recruitment, retention, because as the industry kind of turns over, as those like millennials, as those Gen Z come in, they are looking for companies that really have the best in class technology. You mentioned earlier that your interface is set like the popular social media platforms because that's what people are used to. And that's what's really going to drive not just adoption, but really drive the changes that we need in the industry. And for the operators, it's what's going to allow them to recruit the best of the best and keep them in-house, because that's what they are looking for.
That's right. I was on the call with the client 3 days ago, not 3 days ago, last week before the break. And they had a situation where at one of their properties, they had one person who was retiring who ran all their maintenance, did everything, did the inspections, told everybody else what to do. And they had 5 people that worked for them. And they were like concerned because this one person was walking away with all the knowledge in his head of how everything ran at that property and all the things they did. And 2, like the other 5 people were more than happy to use the technology and everything that were going on, but they didn't know what to do because they were still doing things, the way that one person did, right? So they used that as an opportunity to say, we need to do a transfer now. There's still a room for saying, hey, we need to bring in someone who understands how to maintain that boiler and, how do we do it and what it goes. But you know what? If we can automate the standard operating procedures so that on somebody's first day, they can have, here's a list of things that I can do, and it's super easy to use. And it's like, oh, here is an instruction on how I read the boiler cutoff value, water level. And I just need to record that and then move on. Or, use this kit, test the pH of the pool, type it in here. If it's off, do this. If it's not, do that. Like if I can institutionalize that, it makes it easier for them to not just have standard operating procedures, but make their people successful. And that makes it more efficient, but it also means that they're not just like sort of sitting around waiting to be told what's next.
Exactly. And that's like the power of technology across the board. So you also mentioned, like, as everyone knows, there's so much technology right now just making its way into the property management industry. So when that happens, as an industry matures, you have to start selecting like, oh, what kind of technology do we use? So based off of your experience, like what is the best way for operators to think about implementation and selecting the right technologies for their portfolios? Like what are some of those like best practices and tips that they should keep in mind?
Yeah, it's a great thing. Well, first thing I think is to figure out, are they buying technology that just does something for them automatically, or are they buying something to help them do a job better? Because there are different answers to that. If you just like something that does something for you, like, oh, it just helps me clock in people in and out, and the day after I implement it, I'm all good to go, or I have this service that drives leads to my form on my website and it's just going to work, and I'm going to see whether it works or not work, is different than saying, hey, where are we trying to optimize our company? Where are we trying to find efficiencies? What are we trying to do? Where are we trying to bring automation? And for the second piece where you're saying, okay, how do we have our company become more and more optimized over time, the most important thing you can do is write down what are our goals and who is involved in those goals, who is involved in the process, and make sure all of those people are in the evaluation form. I'll tell you, the worst thing somebody can do is one person in the organization buys a solution that somebody else is going to use, and they don't talk about why they're buying it, and they don't talk about, what their challenges are, and they buy it, and then they hand it off, and then the chief engineer gets it and is like, somebody else bought this, and I guess I'm stuck with it. That's the worst thing that can happen in an organization. So instead, you say, okay, well, what are the goals, and how do we make sure? Oh, well, the asset manager has certain goals out of this, which is I need access to the standard operating procedures. Or, hey, we're buying a bunch of properties and we want to change the procedures that are going on at those from the way they used to, run some other folks to a standardized process, renovate on turn and move it up, whatever that might be. So if they write those down, they're already way ahead of the game. And then the largest ones have implementation managers who manage this process internally, and they understand that there's a rollout and how to do the selection process and who the internal stakeholders are. Because that's the biggest disconnect, is when the internal and external stakeholders are completely, on different pages on what the goal is of the product.
So you touched on a really important point about why, when an operator selects in technology, multiple people need to be involved in that decision. So how can someone actually go about doing that on a very practical level? So how when you select, where you are in the selection process, how do you involve everyone in that decision-making process?
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, as a vendor, I wish that everybody was better at it, because it would make my job a lot better. Mm-hmm. When we go out there to already have them. But what we've seen the best property management companies really is they find the folks who are maybe project managers, who have had areas of managing inside the organization, because they have to have enough internal weight that they're taken seriously, but who are excited about learning new things and want to take that on a little bit and go from there. I think that we are at a point as an industry where we're right at the breaking point, where people are building their own prop tech internal folks, where they're finding people who either have a proclivity to tech and they really enjoy it, or they're saying, hey, person in my org, you may not like this, but you are now the person, and have fun with that. And then we'll start to see the same thing that's happened in the fintech and the martech and the other spaces, where there are people whose jobs are based on helping property management companies be more efficient or get more of something that they're looking for. Just the same way we see, I need to hire a Salesforce consultant. You can get one, a million. You probably have a million people calling you all day long to try and get one, right? You need somebody with an email, marketing, piece who can actually do that, or someone who handles specifically PR. They're all experts on that. And I think we now are at the point where we're starting to see those third-party vendors who are going to be popping up. We're saying, I actually used to be inside this large property management company, and I redid their entire, property ops and inspection suite, and now I go do that. I'm a consultant for other companies who want to do it. It's something
I really love that, because it really shows how things evolve over time. So it's not like a guessing game. You kind of know how it happens when an industry matures. So I love that you mentioned that point, because it is very, very predictable, how it's going to happen. So I'm curious, what are those other key things that you think will happen in the industry that have happened for other industries?
Yeah, so I used to look back. Again, as you mentioned, I started my career in marketing, right? And I remember in the early days, this is a long time ago, and you'd get email lists, and you'd get 100,000 things, and you'd write an email, and then you'd hit blast, and it would go out to everybody, and that was it, right? And then there were all of these other technologies started to appear. And I remember looking at a list of 150 of all of the technologies that we could buy and be like, I'm overwhelmed by this. There's so many technologies. Well, now you look at that same MarTech list, and there are literally 5,000 startups that are on it. 9,000, I think they actually just the last year, right? There's more, and each sub-industry has its own slide, and it's gone crazy and it's grown, right? And that's because industries evolved, and we go from there. So when we go to these, trade shows, and we see oh man, there's 150, there's 200
That's
vendors
just
that
the
are out
start.
here. It's just the start. And I know that scares lots and lots of people who think about this, because the concept of integrating with 150 different technology stacks would make people's brains explode, right? But the concept is, well, what are you trying to do as an organization? And if you can get back to that, you say, well, no one's buying all 10,000 marketing technology stacks at one company. There isn't a single company that has all of them as customers, but all the different variants. Or this company really is more concerned about the satisfaction of their residents and keeping long-term residents. And this company is all about purchasing, properties and turning them around and changing them and running them differently. And they're going to buy different sets of technologies and have it go through.
It's always having that end goal in mind, and then use that as a basis for technology. Because you said this earlier, and it's absolutely true across everything, is technology isn't just a flashy thing. It's there to solve a problem. So you have to know what your problem is before you should think about purchasing technology. One other thing that you mentioned in terms of the selection process that I liked, but I love to kind of dig into that a little bit. You mentioned that you need to involve someone from the teams that has a proclivity to technology. So one of the challenges that I have found, though, is when you do that, you kind of ignore the people that do not. So when that happens, it becomes a little bit more complicated, because for the people that do have that affiliation to technology, are excited about it, how they view it is very different than the typical user. So how should we how should operators bring in those people that are not technology aficionados into the buying process, or should they at all?
Yeah, no, I definitely think they have to, because if you ignore them, you're definitely done, right? Because at the bottom line, these are folks who have been making these properties run every day for their careers, and they're continuing, and no solution is going to come in and just wholesale change everything overnight and you're going to do it a different way. It's going to be we added something. It's an evolution, not a change, right? So I would say, one, make sure that the person who's running the process from a project management knows they have to involve the people who are going to be using it. Two, make sure they're sharing and get sign off on what the goals are, right? If you have the goal being well, we need to be more efficient, we want to know what everybody's doing all day long, 24/7. When the person who's in the field hears that, they're going to be not too happy about trying to make that happen, right? They'd be so what you're telling me is I got to go jump through a bunch of hoops so you know what I was doing all day, and you're going to get a friction of that's not what we were trying to do. We were trying to help you accomplish more, whatever that is, right? And then the third piece is actually do it for real. So we have a piece during our actual evaluations where we show some of the things that you could do with our product. And you say, here are the ways you can get off pen and paper. You won't lose that image. And now you have the report there. We show some of the automation. You could trigger this, this, and this. And then we say, if you have inspections, you'd like to see what they look like on our platform, send us over and we'll modify them, right? We'll put them into our system. And that's super key there, because we can just take it and transfer it from pen and paper to here. That may not actually accomplish any business goals. So if you didn't write down what we were trying to do is this and this, you don't want to move from pencil whipping a pen and pad to pencil whipping an iPad, right? That doesn't do anybody any good. But if you say, we're going to recreate that, we're going to have your person doing the move in, move out inspections run through the existing inspection that's now digital to make sure they can do it just as quickly. And we're going to put in the automation to trigger those other things or to run those reports or whatever you need to do. As long as that's a little more work sometimes, but it helps. It helps. And then you can say, all right, we're going to roll out this one process at this property that's more willing to take it on, and then roll it across the rest of the portfolios. Or we're going to say, hey, we have a set of watch properties that need more supervision than the other ones might need. And so we're going to try a more prescriptive approach there, and we're going to be more adaptive on the other ones, whatever those might be. I don't know if that answers your question on the sort of approach, but it's get the buy-in, make sure they understand they have to, and then be explicit on the benefits including the people who are going to do it. Like, this is why we're buying this software.
And I think that's the heart of it. It's like always tying things back to the benefit. It's not just about digitizing a process that used to be paper. It's solving an actual problem and an actual issue. So I think the main thing is like always going back to what is like that end benefit.
Yep.
So you kind of touched on something that I think it's always interesting, which is like pilots or testing things out before like a portfolio rollout. So when you think about pilots, like where does everyone go wrong when they think about implementing technology and they start with a pilot?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think there's a natural, understandable reaction to be like, hey, why don't we just try this a little bit at one property and see how it goes? There are a couple things that are wrong with that. One, it usually means you just skip the whole process we just talked about because it's low commitment. It's like, I'm not going to get anybody involved in how we should do these kinds of things. I'm not going to actually make sure we do it. We just be like, let's launch the software and see what happens by itself. And change management in an organization doesn't happen by itself. It's the exact opposite, right? It reverts to its mean by itself. So that can be a problem if there's not an investment or a commitment from sort of like someone with an, use the term executive sponsor or whoever that might be to be able to drive it. The second thing is you end up setting up standard operating procedures for the way they do things at that one property. And then you go out and roll it out across the other properties. And they're like, we don't do it that way. Why did you run it up that way? And you don't actually identify which ones are portfolio-wide standard operating procedures and which ones are the ones that we just do it that way and which ones are the ones that we do because they're in a different climate than this one. So we don't need to salt the steps for ice in Florida, it just doesn't happen. Or there isn't a boiler that's down there, right? The same way there might be in Chicago, whatever it might be, on any of those kind of pieces. So you can get false things where you have standard operating procedures that are exactly the opposite of standard operating procedures. You take the codified way they run things at this one, urban multifamily, there's on-site maintenance, and you push it out to the actual sprawling residential communities that they have in a different area completely, and it's just not the right thing to do at the same time. If you don't think about that up front, you'll miss it. And then the third one is like selecting a vendor that doesn't support them, right? And that goes back to the thing we try and do as much as possible, which is we're here to help you out, not just the beginning, but throughout the entire, commitment with the customer.
And I really love that point around like how different it is, how different things are across different buildings within like the same portfolio, and how that can impact what a successful pilot looks like. Because it's done one way here, pilot is successful, but then you go across the portfolio and it's completely different. Yeah. So ideally for you, like what is the best way to go about an implementation? So obviously operators do pilots because they are trying to de-risk. So what is the best practice when it comes to implementations through pilots? Like how should those be done?
Yeah, so I think there's identifications and involving the people and telling them you're in a pilot and we want your feedback on that because it's going to go to other areas and we're still in that zone. Or have we already made it past that point? We're in a scaling point. We're saying, hey, we rolled this out and now we're going to go from there. The planning still has to be the same ahead of time. But then you can say, okay, we're actually going to do some training. We're going to get people on board. We're going to create some videos for this particular portfolio and say, this is a new thing we're rolling out and we want to do it this way. And then it's about working the same way that they talk about their own internal trainings across a variety of different things, saying, hey, we're rolling these out, and it goes from there. It also is different when you think about the third party or fee-based managers versus, owner managed versus, you're engaged with a REIT or somebody else who's trying to put a supervisory layer on top of all of those things, because all of those will be different sort of motivations for rolling out as well. And the REIT might just be, hey, we just instituted this new thing so that we can get reporting across the whole thing. And it's going everywhere because it doesn't do us any good to just know piecemeal one at a time, versus the other thing of saying, hey, what happens if we automated some of the move out processes so that we could try and reduce the turnover at this property from X days to X minus 2 days off the market, and see what we could do on that and move forward. So I know I sound like a broken record, but it all just comes down to being deliberate and conscious about what the desired outcome is, and communication of that with the software vendor, with the property manager, with people, who are using the product on the ground, and making sure they're all in the same loop.
And that makes complete sense, because once you do establish what benefits you're trying to get from software, that is then utilized across the full cycle, from the pilot to the full-scale implementation. So if at the beginning you say, we want to implement a software that helps us cut down on how long it takes us to turn, then you know what software to look at, and then you know what the metrics are going to be during the pilot phase. And then if those are met, you then know that's what we need to scale up. So I think that all makes sense.
That's exactly right. And the bottom line is, many of software products can be used for different ways. Mm-hmm. I want to implement procedures so I reduce my risk and my liability, or I want to save dollars in material cost, or I want to reduce the number of people that I need, or put my people in a better spot, because retaining people is a brutal thing, and replacing that knowledge that is you use our software for all of those, right? But we start with which one is the most important right now, and how can we handle all those things, and rolling them out and go from there.
Oh, absolutely. So you've already touched on this, but my last question is around what are your predictions for technology in the multifamily space over the next 5 years? So I think you already mentioned a little bit, which is not necessarily consolidation, but having people that become experts at implementation, or what should be implemented. But what would you say are your key 3 to 5 predictions when it comes to prop tech over the next couple of years?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of things on that. One is that there will be those internal experts who start to be sought out for their ability to select and roll out technology specifically in this space. And I think that those people will be some of the most highly recruited people in our space, bar none, because they can make that translation between this is the business impact that we had when we rolled out this other one, and this was the one that didn't work, and you should do that one. And if you can save those learning mistakes, it's a material difference across the board, right? So those experts,
substantial material. It's 6 to 8 or sometimes 12 months of lessons.
Exactly right. 2, things are going to get more complex than more simple, just because we have no 2 clients that operate the same, investment theses. They're all different, right? Much less within their portfolios, there's also difference. So it's going to get more complicated, not less. And the last thing is, I think it's going to be an actual evolution of the industry, of folks who can get it and do it well and have it make a impact on their bottom line are going to thrive, be able to scale, be able to grow more. We used to see this, that there was this you could manage up to around 100 units, and then either you went big or you stayed there at 100 units, right? Because that was the sort of how many can I juggle myself on what's going on, and I can't delegate. It's going to happen the same way with technology, in the sense of, we can manage so much more efficiently, more capital efficiently, more people efficiently, more risk reduction efficiently with technology. And so we can outcompete over firms that can't do that, whether that's, owners who can, run a more profitable business for themselves, or whether it's third-party managers who are actually able to return, greater investments, or be able to compete more appropriately against other ones. And I think that will be a big wake-up call for some folks who have sort of put this in the back burner of.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up, because that was going to be kind of my last question. Because that is, do you think then the technology adoption is going to accelerate once those, I would say, the early adopters really start talking about what the benefits they have experienced. So if my neighbor or my competitor down the street, I can see that they have 3 staff members versus the 5 that I have. Is that going to accelerate the change like that much more quickly? Or what do you think is going to be a catalyst to really pick the adoption, which right now is kind of like a slow and steady to that hockey stick adoption?
So I think people won't necessarily see it that explicitly. I don't think people are running those analytics and the competitors the same way they run them on, what are the rent comparables that they're going on there.
I wish they would do that though. Like I wish they would run it.
They should. I wish they would. Yeah. But I think where it'll pop up is they go and they have to backfill and they have to hire a maintenance supervisor, and they hire from somebody who had all of this technology at the other one. And that person walks in and goes,
"It's like I'm out.
I can't work here, right?" And I think that will be how people see it, but it will be the market forces will appear to be driving, and it'll be less clear during that growth and consolidation that the technology is behind it, because it's an incremental thing, right? You don't have on Tuesday, I was all analog on my processes, and on Wednesday, I was all digital and automated. Nobody can, boil the ocean like that. So you start saying, oh, I just made the move from paper to digital. Then I started adding some triggers. Then I started running some reports on things where required processes are not happening, and putting mediation strategies in there. Then I started automatically triggering things based on other data points, and it just adds up, over time. So I don't think anyone will see it as quite as explicitly, although I wish we did. I wish we had a index of the number of people per unit and different segments and stuff like that we could directly tie to the technology, but for another
enterprise. I love that point though of how adoption is going to be driven partly by just like job changes, and I think that might actually work really well now that I think more about it for this industry, which is there is a high level of turnover. So as people move across the different companies, if they have been exposed to something better, they would say, hey, at my last job, this is really what made life easier for me. Right. And I think what's interesting is that I have a few LinkedIn connections in the industry, and I see them post this regularly where they say, I'm not going to work for this company because I know they use this specific technology and it just has never worked for me in the past.
Yeah. And then multiply that by those thousands of different technology platforms that we have, and talking about that. That's exactly right. But when you talk about the PMS, there's not worth it, I don't like it, or the begrudging usage of it, which is I came here and I didn't think about the fact that I had to use platform, and I wish I would have.
It's like blank that out.
Yeah, exactly right.
Okay, awesome. Well said. It was so nice to have you on here. I've learned a lot on not just the compliance side, but also some of those issues that come up when operators are thinking about technology implementation. So thank you for joining the Apartment Rebels podcast.
Awesome. Thank you very much for having me, Jude.